Hello girls! Last week you were introduced to the composition called The Four Seasons, which was composed by Antonio Vivaldi. Remember, he was called the Red Priest because he had flaming red hair and he was a priest. Because Vivaldi had really bad asthma, he couldn't keep working as a priest, saying Mass, so he worked for about 40 years at a girls' orphanage in Venice, writing music for them to play. People came from far and wide to hear the girls play. In today's lesson, you're going to learn a bit more about the period in history that Vivaldi was writing music, or composing, in, called the Baroque period. And you are going to learn about the musical style that Vivaldi used when he wrote the Four Seasons, called program music. Vivaldi was writing music during a period in history known as the Baroque period. This period started around 1600 and ended around 1750, so it lasted about 150 years. The fashion during the Baroque period, particularly during the 1700s, which was when Vivaldi was composing the Four Seasons, was to make things very, very ornate, which means highly decorated. The aim was to make people have a reaction when they saw things that were made, like buildings and clothing. Rather than taking buildings for granted, they were built with the aim of making people say, "Gosh, look how beautiful that is." The architects wanted people to have an emotional response to the buildings. Have a look at these images of buildings. Look how dramatic the lighting and color is. Look at the color of the paint. All the pastel colors, gold trimmings and elaborate decorations on the buildings. I'm sure you will have seen buildings like this on your travels in Europe. When you saw them, can you remember if you or your parents said, "Wow, look at that beautiful cathedral"? This is an emotional response. It means you feel emotions when you see something. During the Baroque period, many nations like Great Britain, Holland, Spain, and Portugal were sailing all over the world, colonizing countries like America, and many parts of Africa, like my own country, South Africa. This is why, if you travel to Brazil or America or South Africa, you can see the same types of buildings there too. Now look at these pictures of clothing during the early 1700s, when Vivaldi was composing the Four Seasons. Look at, again, the pastel colors and the ribbon, lace and flowers embroidered into the clothes. Lots of petticoats and a wide hooped undergarment were worn to widen the dresses. Actually, sometimes door frames were built wider, just so that women could fit through them during that time. Can you imagine trying to play at break time wearing something like this? All those layers and corsets couldn't have been very comfortable for girls like you who wanted to move around and do cool things. Anyway, so you can see that during the Baroque time, people wanted things to be very decorated and very ornate to get people to have an emotional response. In the same way, music was very decorated and ornate during the Baroque period. Just like how dressmakers and architects wanted people to have an emotional response to clothing and buildings, composers wanted the music to really communicate emotions to the listeners, and they wanted their audience to feel emotions when they heard the music. Remember that The Four Seasons was based on a set of poems about the seasons. Vivaldi really wanted us to feel each season and bring it to life for us. I'll read the poem to you here now. Spring has arrived. Birds welcome it with their happy songs, and flowing brooks murmur sweetly, touched by the breath of gentle breezes. Dark clouds blanket the sky. Thunder and lightning announce a storm. In a meadow full of flowers, with leaves rustling overhead, a goatherd sleeps, his faithful dog by his side. To the festive sounds of a bagpipe, nymphs and shepherds dance in their favorite spot, as spring appears in all its brilliance. In spring, we can hear the joyful start of spring. You can almost imagine the flowers blooming, the leaves emerging on the branches of the trees. You can hear the whole of the earth celebrating the birth of lambs in the fields and the fresh, warm breezes after a long, cold winter. Then the birds start singing, and you can really hear their happy chirping in the music. When we hear this part of the music, we know Vivaldi wants us to feel joyful. Then the music changes and becomes more fluid and smooth. This is where the poem talks about brooks murmuring sweetly and the gentle breath of breezes. The music seems to flow and move more easily here, just like water and wind does. Close your eyes and hear the babbling brook flowing along and the warm breeze blowing through your hair. And then a thunderstorm! Oh, what a racket it makes! Can you hear the thunder and the lightning? Can you feel how every creature would be scurrying away to hide in a tree or in a hole in the ground? Can you imagine all the mummy sheep and baby lambs huddling together to keep warm and dry? And then the storm passes and once again the sun comes out. We can see the meadow full of flowers and hear the leaves rustling on the trees. All the bees, flowers, birds and lambs can once again come out and play in the sunshine. Spring has definitely sprung. When composers write music that tells a story, we call this program music. The story can be hinted at to the audience through the title of the piece. In this case, the title of The Four Seasons immediately tells us what we can expect to hear. And the first part of the Four Seasons is called Spring. We know that spring is about rebirth and new life, so we can expect the music to be positive and happy, energetic and fresh. When composers write program music, they try to make the music sound like things that actually happen. Think about what birds sound like when they're chirping. Compare that natural sound to what the music sounds like when Vivaldi wants it to sound like birds. It sounds really similar. When this happens, we say the music is program music. Here are some other compositions that are written using program music. The first is the composer Saint-Saëns' piece of music called The Aquarium. Listen to how the music really makes you feel like you're drifting underwater. The Aquarium is part of a larger composition called Carnival of the Animals. In this composition, Saint-Saëns wrote pieces that depicted all sorts of other animals. These include the elephant, The aviary, about birds. And wild donkeys. The British composer Edward Elgar also wrote a large work called the Enigma Variations. In one of the pieces, called Nimrod, he is trying to tell a story of loneliness and sadness. You can really hear how he brings those emotions to life in the music. This particular piece is often used on Remembrance Day. At this point, the music continues for quite some time, and then we reach the final climax at the end, which really brings about the feeling of loneliness and sadness and desperation. Now, girls, I'd like you to go to Seesaw and have a look at the questions I have posed for you over there, which I'd like you to answer. Good luck.